So hi, and everybody else that's joining us online. We have quite a few people out here in the auditorium. I'm just going to explain how this works a little bit. So we have people here and then we have people online. So if anybody has any questions, you can either put it in on the chat or turn on your camera or something. That way we know that you have a question. We'll just do questions like that. So feel free to say anything at any time in the chat. We have someone watching the chat to make sure we get your question. And I guess I will just start out introducing our author. So let me make sure I pronounce it right. So Edwidge Danticat, right?
Edwidge Danticat.
Edwidge Danticat. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So she is a Haitian-American novelist and short story writer. She was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and then she moved to New York as a young girl. Her first novel, Breath, Eyes, Memory, was published in 1994 and was later chosen for Oprah's book club. She has since written a bunch of other books, like Crick Crack, which was a National Book Award finalist, and a memoir titled Brother, I'm Dying, which was nominated for multiple awards, and then Claire of the Sea Light, which we read for our book club this semester. She has been awarded many awards, including being named a 2009 MacArthur Fellow, a 2018 Ford Foundation The Art of Change Fellow, and the winner of the 2018, I'm going to mispronounce this, Nedustat International Prize, and the 2019 St. Louis Literary Award. And we chose to read Claire of the Sea Light this semester because of the unique voice and the different perspectives that was presented in it, as well as the consistent themes of family, culture, and identity throughout all of her work. And we're really excited to talk with you today. Thank you so much for meeting with us and to ask answer our questions and stuff.
Oh, well, good evening. Thank you all very much for having me. These are really interesting circumstances, to say the least, but I'm glad that you all are here. I think what we agreed on was that I would make some remarks and maybe I'll read a little bit, like a little section from the book, and then I'll be very happy. Yeah, thank you for the thank you for the feedback, and then I'll be very happy to take your questions. So this book, Claire of the Sea Light, really, I don't know which edition you all have, but actually on the cover, I'll start with this. On the cover is my daughter. It's a picture of my daughter when she was the age that Claire is now. So that tells you a little bit of how personal a book it is to me. And when I really was inspired to write the book, when I was watching a documentary about some children who were adopted in Haiti, and the parents, their adoptive parents, were saying, because the way some adoptions work in Haiti is that the children are not necessarily orphaned, but their parents might have brought them to an orphanage. And some, I have a friend who lived in an orphanage, and his mom visited him on Sundays, brought him things. So it's people who may not be able to take care of their kids and will bring them to a home, like an orphanage, for a better life. So I was watching a documentary like that, and someone said, like in the community of the adoptive parents, said, they don't care for their kids the same way we do. And I was I was really upset by it. And I felt really like, oh my gosh, I wish that person knew what a great big sacrifice it is to actually give up your children or to leave them behind. Because in another way, this is what happened with me and my brother. When I was 2, my dad left Haiti and moved to the US. And when I was 4, my mom joined him. And they spent 8 years in New York working to send for us, to have us come back, to have us join them in New York. And that separation, even I didn't quite understand how emotionally difficult it was for my mother until when I was older, we were having a conversation and she said something like, she said, every time I ate something, I wondered what you two were eating. Every time I was about to go to bed, I wondered how you were sleeping. And it was a very long and painful soliloquy that made me, that emphasized for me the difficulty of that choice. And now that I'm a mother myself, to Mira, who's on the cover, and my other daughter, Layla, it's very hard to even imagine how you know, like that if I were put in the position where I would have to make a choice like Claire's father has to make, or that other parents have to make, of literally, you know, having to be separated from their children to give them a better life. And it's a choice that so many parents have, you know, had really to make all over the world. It's a very difficult choice. And in some cases, you know, they don't win in terms of how people view it. Like if you take your child across, you know, the Mediterranean or the, you know, or the Caribbean Sea, and you people like, oh, what kind of parent are you? Or if you take them across the southern border, you walk, you know, to the border, people are like, what kind of parent are you to put your child on La Bestia, or to put your child on a boat to risk their lives? And then you also are chastised for being the kind of parent that leaves your child behind. So it's a very heart-rending choice that for a lot of parents making these decisions, a choice of life and death. So and thinking all of that after watching that documentary, I went to sleep and a little girl kind of popped up in my mind. And with the full name, Claire Limier-Lamé, Claire of the Sea Light. And so I decided, I had the character, you know, often people will ask writers, what came first? Was it the story or the character? In this case, it was the character. It was this little girl kind of glowing, just the way her parents are described on the boat, right? When they're fishing, that luminescence was about her. And then I decided to build a story around her. But then in the process, it became in a way more about the town. I sometimes wish that I had called the book Ville Rose because it's like Winesburg, Ohio, or others. It's really also a story. It's a story about this little girl, but it's also a story about a place. And this place is Ville Rose, which is named after my mother, Rose, and modeled after a southern town in Haiti called Léogâne, where my family's from, where I spent my summers from Port-au-Prince, from the capital, as a little girl, and where I returned to many times. It was a fishing community, like a lot of other fishing communities in the southern coast, like in Les Cayes and Port Salut and other places that I also incorporated in this story. So what I always want people to remember, because sometimes writing, it's like a story cycle, because the book falls in that middle place between novel and short stories. But the book is supposed to all happen in one night, right? It's that night at the beach where they're looking, where they have the wake of the fishermen, and then they're looking for Claire. So I wanted to read you just a short excerpt from the experience of, from when Madame Gaël comes to try to get, finally comes to terms with and accepts Claire. And of course, if you've read the book, you know that Madame Gaël also has a very painful past with her own little girl that she brings into this experience. So I'll start with this, and maybe if there's time at the end, I'll read another short excerpt that also at the beach with Max Jr. But this is when Madame Gaël returns to the beach and decides that she will take Claire. When she finally made it to the beach, Madame Gaël spotted a group of little girls. They were holding one another's hands and moving clockwise in a circle, a singing circle, a one. Madame Gaël was too far away to hear what they were singing, but she could hear their laughter, each girl, it seemed, trying to outdo the next. They seemed to be the happiest people in Ville Rose, 6 little brown and black angels just skipping around. She moved slowly, not wanting the pleasure of her approach to end. She had played the one as a child during recess and at night in her parents' yard with visiting friends. What she remembered most about it, though, was how less lonely she always felt holding someone else's hand. It would have sounded odd if she told someone how much she wanted to take all those little girls home, set them up in the many empty rooms of her large house, and whenever she was sad, ask them to play the one with her. There were many days when she wanted to grab a little girl and hold her in her arms just to inhale her smell, the smell that the men she slept with lacked, Their smells were musty. They smelled of roads and dust. They smelled of work and sweat of other women. But little girl smelled of roses and wet leaves, of talcum powder and the dew. In spite of what everyone had told her after her daughter died, longings like this had never subsided, and her losses had not made her stronger. They made her weak. They had given others control and power over her. She didn't want to continue being weak, but she didn't want to die either. She was too eager to see what would come next, what her husband and her daughter had missed. She was both hungry for life and terrified of it. Her evenings with the men she slept with let the rage and confusion disappear for a while and allowed her to make it through the days. There were times, though, that she wanted to take off, leave the country, and never come back. But she had heard too much about the difficulties of starting life in another land to want to try. She'd heard about people who had been infantilized while learning a new language, people who ended up cleaning houses or wiping the butts of other people's children. She saw these people return to Villerose at Christmas or in the summertime with extravagant hairstyles and expensive looking clothes, but their eyes always betrayed them. All the humiliation they had endured could be detected there. Their skins betrayed them too, the burns from the dry cleaner steamer or the car wash or the restaurant kitchens, as visible as brands on animals. Nah, none of that was for her. Her ancestors on both sides of her family were buried at the town cemetery, among the town's oldest families. She could not be diaspora. She liked her ghost nearby. She could never live in a foreign land, then return only a few times a year. She could not ever risk dying and being buried in a cold place. She would always be here, like the boulder that stopped her feet when at last she reached the little girls. Claire, she realized that she was being watched and occasionally glanced her way. Like her mother, Claire was beautiful. She moved more gracefully, more purposefully than the rest of the girls. Madame Gaëlle walked over to the girls, and immediately her presence stopped the wound. Is your papa here? Madame Gaëlle asked Claire. The girl nodded. She was looking down at her hands and at her sand-coated feet. Impatient, the other girls lost interest and drifted away. Madame Gaëlle motioned for the girl to follow her. She waited for her to finish placing the sandals on her feet, then told her, I knew your mother. Claire's eyes seemed to light up the way children's eyes do when they're hungry for stories. I knew your mother longer than you've been alive, Madame Gaëlle said. Your mother was my friend. It was not altogether a lie. The girl's head was arched towards her, her mouth wide open as though to inhale Madame Gaëlle's words, which came out so fast that she could barely stop. Madame Gaëlle was not sure what she was thinking and what she was actually saying out loud. She waited so long to have you, your mother, she said. I wouldn't even say wait. She tried to pull you out of the sky, pry you out of God's hands. Yes, God's hands, I'd say. She wanted you so bad. I know she pulled you out of God's hands. That's the only way I can put it. She was well the whole time you were inside of her, never even seemed tired, except that last week. Then the midwife was sent for. No one knows what happened while you were being born. I hear the midwife thought all was going well. You should not blame yourself that she's gone back in God's hand, and no one can pull her back. Not you, Claire, not you back in God's hand. Your mother and my husband and my daughter back in God's hand, and everyone else who has ever died who didn't deserve to die, though who deserves to die? Too many people die here. And why do the rest of us get to live? Thank you. So I think now if you're a facilitator, I'm happy to take your questions. I don't know if they'll be in the chat or if they'll be voiced in some way.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? I'm kind of behind the camera, but hopefully you can hear me okay.
All right. I can hear you. Okay.
Perfect. Does anybody have any questions right away? So if not, I actually had a question. Okay. Here, I'll come here so you can kind of see me a little bit. So I am super interested in your writing process. So you said you came up with Claire and her story kind of first. How did the other stories branch off from that? Did you just kind of pick out characters from her story and go from there, or how did that work?
Yes, thank you. So the first, I then wrote the first story, and it sort of came out in this going backwards kind of way. And actually writing that first story, writing Claire's story and the people she knew got me interested in the town. And then I started populating the town, if you will. And she was the connector once I started populating the town. So then I became interested in certain people, and in some ways they became, connected to her. So there was the school, the owner of the school, and then all these, it sort of branched off. But before I could write even the other stories, or I could write anybody else past the first story, I had to be able to so clearly visualize the town. And I got to a point where I was writing it where I felt like I could walk down the street of that place, which was a collage of different places. And the lighthouse, and I wanted to put things in the town that I wished were in certain towns. And I'm really intrigued by lighthouses. And they're just what they represent, but also how beautiful they are. And I wanted to have a lighthouse very desperately in it. And so just putting different things, but it was really almost writing the book was a way of populating the town. Initially, I had thought another narrative device, process that I had thought of was to make the book like a radio show. And radios are very big and still a huge medium in Haiti, even with the internet. If you're in a rural area, that's how you get your news, that's how you get your entertainment, that's how you get your music. And when I was growing up, it was a great gift to get a transistor radio. Often it was shaped like weird things, like it was shaped like an apple or like something. And so I was like, oh, this could be almost like a radio serial. That's actually how I was thinking about it. I guess now you would call it a podcast. But before when I was writing the book, podcasts weren't what they were now. But I was thinking of like each chapter would be like an episode of the radio show. And just as the radio show, just like the Nula, Muela, that the show ends up being, you end up having a kind of radio show that's used as a public forum, or kind of like a way for people who can't get justice in the courts to get justice in, I guess, the court of public opinion. But I had initially imagined the whole book as being that way of someone on the radio telling the story of the town.
Anybody else have questions? Oh.
Spin slowly, so. Hi, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has just been, I've been excited about it for a long time, so my students have had to be excited because I keep talking about it.
Thank you.
Lots of things I wanted to ask, but since Mackenzie started there, I thought of the frogs. We were fascinated by the chapter with the frogs, and we just kind of kept coming back to that. It reminded me of all those parts of the book to really have that sense of magic realism. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about what you were if that was in your thinking or how that relates.
Well, actually, when I was writing the book, there was in the news all these, and there's always in the news. I mean, I live in Miami. It's kind of climate change ground zero, and there often we were told like there would be these certain kind of signs, right? And the book also has, I suppose, the burden of being set right before the 2010 earthquake. And so this town, I'm imagining all of this is happening right like on the cusp literally of 2010. And this town would have been, if not completely devastated, but very much changed. It was the last time in this book that this town, like the town it's based on in many ways, would be ordinary. And that these people would have, their concerns would change drastically just a few months after the setting of this book. And one of the signs that I had read about was frogs, was sort of, and in all books, like in Their Eyes Were Watching God, there's that too, of the animals knowing before we do certain things about nature, how the ground is shifting. And one of the things we started learning a lot about earthquakes too is that before you have sort of like the big ones, you have these micro, rattles. And so the frogs to me were about that. It was also a summer of extraordinary heat. It was sort of like a kind of rebellion of nature. So it is magical realism in a way, but it's also based on science. And that was happening in different places where it was very hot and all these frogs were dying. And I keep going back in my mind to my watching early on, bless him, Al Gore, and that documentary, and An Inconvenient Truth, where he talks about, just just raising the temperature gradually until you don't realize you're boiling. And in my mind, that he was talking about a frog. And so all of that went into that sort of these signs that in some ways are biblical, but now we have so many biblical things happening in the real world that to me, that all fell into that it's a kind of a series of signs of what was going to be ahead for this town. And also pregnant women have really horrible cravings. I'm lucky I didn't have those type of cravings.
Thank you. I think there's some questions online, so I'm going to pan it over to Miranda, who has our chat.
Hi. I'll have to talk pretty loud, and I'm a quiet talker normally, so let me know if you can't hear me.
Okay.
So we have two questions from Stephanie Davis, and her first question is, what did you want your readers to take away from the characters in Hot Air Balloon?
Well, what did I want my readers to take away from the characters? First of all, I always want my readers to really enjoy the experience of reading the book. And it doesn't have to be a fun and jolly story, but I think one can enjoy a book on many levels. You can enjoy the language, you can enjoy the story, you can enjoy the characters, you can enjoy the setting, the descriptions. I wanted it to be an engaging experience for the reader. And then I want them to think deeper about certain things it's really a book ultimately about small town life for me. There are many moments where I was thinking, it's like, this is like, even, in the way Madame Gael is like, she wants to leave, but then you have these ties and small town life in a way that translates to issues of migration, right? Like people who want to stay somewhere, but you can't after a while. Like the place makes it impossible for you to stay. As Worcestershire, a poet, a wonderful poet, says in her poem, like sometimes home won't let you stay. And so it was like that this book is also people who are on the cusp of migration also. Like you can see that father getting on a boat to Miami after he finds a home for his daughter, right? Or you could see this woman who's more privileged, she would have a very different migration, but you could see her making a different choice to say, finally, I've had enough of this. So I also see it as a book about small town life, and small town life can be like small town, like living in any village, in rural Haiti, which I've spent a lot of time in, or it could be a small town where just Jesus, like, I'm tired of these people. I've known them all my life, and their gossip is my gossip. It's too much at this point. So, but I want people to take away. I never want to impose on people what to take away from the book. I always say to folks, when you buy it or it's given to you, it's yours. You interpret it as you please. But I'm always for me, it's great that you've had the open mind to allow yourself to enter this world. And then you come out with, you know, whatever, the way it strikes you, and it will hit, you know, each one of us differently based on our own experiences and you know, in life course.
I'm going to jump in 1 second, Miranda. You don't even have to pivot to me because you're going to go right back to Miranda. Some of the students in my classes read some of your short stories as well, so don't get alarmed if those kinds of questions come up too, because we've read around your work a little bit.
So the next question is also from Stephanie, and she said, do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book?
Oh, yes, I'm definitely trying to build a body of work. I see all of it as a kind of one big story and many parts, right? Just the way that these stories kind of are a collage that build up to a whole picture, to you know, a larger picture. I definitely see my work that way. And it's a work that, you know, is, you know, I do nonfiction, I do fiction, I do some picture books, I have done a YA and a middle grade book, but I still see all of it as like storytelling. I see all of it as one big story. And I love actually when there is some connections. I haven't done like a sequel to a book or anything like that, but I kind of like the idea that the books are in conversation with one another, just in the same way that they're also in conversation with books that I already love, you know, like things that I have read and appreciated, if they're, you know, to kind of to have echoes in the books that I'm writing. So, but I see it as an ongoing conversation between my books, also between my books and the other books out in the world that I admire.
Great. And then we have a question from Hunter. When you were writing this book, did you have a pretty solid idea of where you wanted to get to go, or did that kind of get revealed the more you worked on it?
Yeah, Hunter, like when I'm writing, I love that way of, I love the process of discovering what I'm writing. So for example, with Claire of the Sea Light, when I had the girl, I was like, what am I going to do with this? And there's a whole process, you know, for a while where you kind of walk around with the idea and I'm thinking, is it going to be anything at all? You know, or is it, you know, you put it away and it comes back. But the stuff that stays, it's like the work that just won't let you go, right? And so once I have that, once I feel like it's solid and at least I have that interest, you know, that drive to pursue an idea, I try to imagine where it would end up. And so back to that question of process, I try to have a perimeter for the things that I'm writing. So I feel like if I have a beginning, I feel like I'm starting with this girl on the beach, and I think I'll end up back on the beach, or I think I'll end up in New York, or I think I'll end up in Miami. But I need to have a kind of destination, even if it doesn't end up being where the book ends. But I like to just have something to write towards, and I find that helps me. I'm not, you know, I'm not like an outline type. I don't outline, I don't plan too much because I love that element of surprise. I love that feeling. Writers say this all the time of the characters taking over. So I feel like one of the advantages of writing a story is that you get to read it first. So I really love that part of the process of the ongoing discovery.
Okay, well, we have a few more questions here. If you guys have any questions, raise your hands so that we don't miss you. But Stephanie said, what did you edit out of this book? If you would want to reveal that to us.
Well, it's been a while.
Just the drafting and how he drafts the book went through, and if there were any stories that you found that you left out or couldn't fit in for one reason or another.
All right, thank you. Well, it's been a while, so I don't remember everything I edited out, but I edit a lot out. I do a lot of editing in general, and maybe that also has to do with the way I work. So I try to do a draft, you know, and it's a very often a very bad draft, a very loose draft. And then I go back and layer on. So for this book, I don't, I didn't take anything out. I don't have an orphan chapter, let's say, of it, but I did a lot of editing towards connecting once I had the separate pieces, and to try to overlap some things and trying to make some connections closer. But I do a lot of editing. For me, writing is about, I would say, close to like maybe 75% editing. And a lot of the editing is cutting, because I just write a big amorphous thing that I then try to sculpt. I see it, I think someone has said that it's kind of like sculpting, you know, sometimes writing is where you're kind of hammering away at this rock until a figure, you know, until some shape emerges out of it.
So we have more questions here. Stephanie said, how do you select the names of your characters?
I select the name of my characters a lot through, I used to have baby books, like naming children. So, and now I do internet searches, but I do have a book now where once I've used a name, where I just have a list that so I can make sure I don't use it again. So I have like a book of non-character, like don't call your characters this again, kind of. But I go through baby books. I look a lot at the meaning of the names. I also go through the sound of the names. And I remember learning early on, you know, when I was starting out, you know, my editors telling me, you know, you don't want the names to be too similar, so that your readers can be able to differentiate. Like, for example, you don't like too many, I already have Gael. I couldn't have like Jillian, you know, so things like that sometimes, like the very basic technical things about it. But I love the process of name. I put a lot of thought in naming the characters, and often, you know, they have to be, a lot of characters are Haitian, so there are Haitian names, and sometimes I try to use very common Haitian names. Sometimes I try to use names that are more, you know, that would be more unusual for a Haitian family or a Haitian child. But I put a lot of consideration into it. So if the person who asked the question, if you're a writer, I guess the takeaway would be, name your characters like you would name your children, you know, with great care.
So the next question is, how many hours a day do you write on average?
You know, now it depends. And when I was just starting out and I was a single woman living alone, I wrote pretty much all the time. I binged wrote, I called it. If I had an idea, I would just write around the clock. I would stop for meals and other things, but I would binge write. I would basically write around the clock, especially if I was in the throes of I was having a good run. But I have a teenage daughter now, and I have an 11-year-old who are homeschooling like everybody else's child, who are at home with me. So, and it's different for me now, having people in the house all the time with me. And so I end up writing at night, and I don't do it every day. So I'm writing around the moment and around the life that I have now. I would say I average maybe 2 or 3 hours a day now, whereas before I would write during the school hours of my daughters. I'm not complaining the least bit. But I always say to writers, you know, I think it's so important for all of us that, you know, who are creators, to learn to do it around the life that we have. Because, you know, if you have 2 jobs and you have to wake up 1 hour earlier to get your hour in, you do that. So it's crucial, no matter what's happening. If it's so important to you, you just write around the circumstances that you have. You write around the life that you have. Just as some people won't compromise their like workout time, or you have to be that way. You have to be like, okay, this is my 1 hour to do my work, to do my writing, and sometimes I have to repeat that advice to myself, but but that's the ideal. Ideally that's how it would go.
We have a question from Dr. Watson. He said, how do your various languages work together when you write?
How do my various languages work together when I write? I really feel like they come together. And I feel like I think English has been good to me for that, because I've had, when I started writing, these models of writers who were doing that very well. Writers like Sandra Cisneros, who were doing it with Spanish, or Julia Alvarez, who, when you read them, you could feel like the tense, the rhythm of Spanish in theirs. And so their work gave me a sense of confidence that I could do that with Creole and French. And Creole is a very visual, a very beautiful language. There's with a lot of proverbs, with a lot of metaphors. So I try to bring that along with me, and the rhythm of the English that I speak and that I write. And often, the characters are speaking Creole, and so it's almost like doing a simultrans of when you're with dialogue. And so it's even more important to try to get the rhythm of their words and the English that I'm writing.
So no need to apologize, Stephanie, by the way. Thank you for your question. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book?
I do a lot of research, and sometimes it's big time research. For example, and we have to realize sometimes you're doing research without realizing it, right? Like it could be a whole life, like is a kind of research trip. If you're writing a certain kind of story that then you're mining past experiences for. But I wrote a book called The Farming of Bones, which is about a massacre of Haitian cane workers in the Dominican Republic in 1937. So for that book, I had to do extensive research. I had to read a lot of history books, what was happening in the period, what was the region like. I had to go to the places in person to see them. But Claire of the Sea Life, for example, it turns out that I was kind of doing research all the time by having been going to this town, most of my life. So that then folds into, but then there's also research kind of like, sometimes you're not sure, is it a lake? Is it a river? And I think there are so many more possibilities now to do certain kind of research, right? Like if you went someplace and you forgot what the street would look like, and you want to write about a character walking down it, now there's like so much, you can do Google things, you can, so there's a lot of possibilities for research. But for me, I think research really helps pin down certain things, makes it more visual. So I try to do as much research as possible. And you have to realize too, you're not going to always use all the research you do. It could be, the way some reporters talk about writing on background, right? It could be some stuff that folds into the character without you overtly using it. But I think research is, for me personally, research is very important.
Her next question kind of goes on with the question I was interested in asking. She said, what was your hardest scene to write? And I wanted to know what your favorite chapter to write was.
Oh, yes. So the hardest scene for me to write was about the death of Madame Gayen's daughter. And by then I had young daughters myself. So all the scenes in which, Madame Gayen is pained and grieved are very painful. And I remember, I think, was it like Stephen King? I heard him once say that sometimes we write the things that we're most afraid of. So we feel like, okay, I've done that, so it won't actually happen. So, but those scenes were still like, there's a part of me that was so superstitious, like about writing that kind of loss. The frog one, it was fun writing the frogs. Like the frogs was really a lot of fun for me to write. And more emotionally was that scene that I read to you, right? Like of those two potentially coming together, for me was a really, I loved writing that scene. And really I want to like in explaining the one, you know, the one is it's like it's Ring Around the Rosie. I guess it's the closest it comes to this description, but it's a game that, you know, where little girls hold hands, they go in a circle, and it's like they don't all fall down the way they do in the Ring Around the Rosie, but it's for me, I saw that as a kind of you know, a visual representation of what everybody was trying to do really around that town to hold together and stay together. And so, and I also love, like, it was painful, but it was a scene I enjoyed writing when the dad is in there talking to, when Madame Gaëlle is in there talking to the dad. And I remember sometimes you have memories around a kind of writing process. And I remember reading a lot of Pablo Neruda sea poems at that time. I was in that period, and there was so many of those in my mind as I was writing that scene. I felt like, you know, Pablo Neruda was holding my hand. the ghost of Pablo Neruda was with me, doing a lot of the beach, writing a lot of those beach and seaside scenes.
I kind of have a question. You're talking about how, you know, you obviously have to visualize this a lot. You even said how in your mind you can walk down these streets. When you dream, like at night, are you ever in any of the settings of your books? Like, have you ever really lived that?
Oh, that's really, like, nobody's ever asked me that before. No, thank God. But I do, you know, and I'm trying to think, like, because, you know, I think also when you talk about dreams, it's on so many layers. I'm like, and I still have to stop and think about it. I don't know. I've never dreamed a setting, but I have often closed my eyes and seen the place. Like, I need that for the writing process. Like, I need to be able to, and it doesn't happen with every story. With this book, it happened. Because I was actually, it was almost like augmenting places that I already knew and streets that I'd already walked down, but adding certain things that I wanted there, like the lighthouse and the school, and so it was almost like an enhanced reality. So that was for me really the only book even that I felt that's so actually real. Other books, you know, you're kind of seeing them through one character, and this one was also such a collective that I felt like I had to see the whole town. And when you're writing a kind of choral piece like that with all these people, there's always that experience of, like, when I'm with Claire, I'm wondering what Madame Gaëlle is doing, you know, at the same time, and I'm wondering where this other character is, and I'm wondering, and that's what also why I thought was, that's why I ended up ultimately not going with the radio version, because I felt like it would be just about the ear, where I wanted it to be so much about all this, like, almost like everybody also is aware of the other people. But now that you've kind of implanted it in my subconscious, I'm sure I'm gonna go to sleep tonight and and dream some of these settings, especially since I haven't left my house much the last 6 months.
I would ask a question about audience. To whom do you direct your words? A Haitian American, would someone with a Haitian background better understand your work, or an American? And also your children's works, right? I mean, do you change your audience when you write a different text, or is there some kind of different audience? I mean, are you your audience?
That's exactly right. I am my audience, and a version of me that's 15 years old and looking for books to read. That's really who I think about, because thinking about other people too much as audience is intimidating, and even the people who are closest to you, right? Because I realized my parents, who loved me, so much, I was terrified of how they would react to my work, and so that they would reject it, or that they would be offended by it. So I couldn't. I'm like, even if these people who birthed me, I'm afraid of their response, then I have to kind of limit and protect that circle of it. So I always think the person I'm writing for is the girl I was when I was 15, who was a voracious reader, who was just like inhaling like Nancy Drew, Toni Morrison, and Harlequin not romances. For that girl, I think that's my audience. And and it's been said so much that sometimes the most, like Toni Morrison said this thing that I've always loved, where she said, Dostoevsky didn't know that he was writing for a little Black girl in Lorain, Ohio. And we can go down that, genealogy through so many other people. She didn't know she was writing for a little girl from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And so I think we can't even imagine that audience and who the audience is, but it will always be the person who needs to read it at the time that they read it, if we want to be church about it. Right?
You mentioned authors that you love, but you didn't say who they were. So I'm curious about who some of the authors that you love and the works and what you love about them.
Definitely, Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. The first book I read in English when I came here was Maya Angelou's "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings." I also read, I read a lot of Joy Luck Club author.
Amy Tan.
Amy Tan. I also read a lot of Amy Tan, and I think, and Sandra Cisneros, as I said, and Julia Alvarez, and I remember too that my 15-year-old self and older was always looking for these immigrant stories at the same time. And I remember reading the Joy Luck Club and thinking, oh wow, that's like my mother and her friends, or Paul Marshall's Brown Girl Brownstone, at the same time that my parents were like trying so hard to buy a house, not a brownstone, but a house, because it meant like once you had ownership, once you had your own, owned something, it meant that you were finally grounded in the country, right? Like that there was a sense of like precarity from my parents about renting. So they were obsessed with buying a house just in the same way. And that the family was trying to buy their brownstone. So just seeing those, yourself reflected in literature in that way, for me was very powerful.
I want to allow some more time for you guys to ask some questions. I have some here, but I want to make sure you guys give it time. No. Okay. So, sorry, I didn't find my place here. Okay. Do you hide any secrets in your books that only a few people will find, or that you hope only a few people will find?
No, actually. But I do think probably maybe people, if they're Creole speakers, will see some layers of, like in the phrases, because I don't directly translate all the phrases. So there might be something like that. But for example, there's an example. It's not a secret, but it's kind of I guess a tribute. Langston Hughes, who spent a lot of time in Haiti, wrote about his travels in Haiti, wrote a children's book called Popo and Fifina, and it's set during the the US occupation of Haiti in 1915, 1933. And there are these two children who are going to a lighthouse in the book. And I thought, and my life, during the whole time of my lighthouse, I was like, this is Langston Hughes's lighthouse. Like I sort of try to incorporate a little bit of that. So not secrets, but for me though, it's the question turns in a different way, because so now, for example, when I read my first book, there are clues for me. There are things that remind me of things that were happening in my life at that time. So the aunt in the book has breast cancer, and I realized, oh, I wrote that because my aunt had breast cancer at that time. So there are moments like that. There are things that where the book is a kind of map, and it could be for other people. Like I've met young people who said, that book, Breath as Memory, was with me through foster care. It was the only, one of the few things I was able to carry with me from place to place. So I think there's ways also that books can become maps, and we can recall certain things that were happening in our lives. I think that's true for both the writer and in some cases the reader too.
Langston Hughes was born here in Joplin. I just had to throw that in.
Woo! See, I know there are no coincidences in this one. Wow. Are there monuments? I'm afraid to say monuments.
Oh, yes, the Boulevard, and our university has had Langston Hughes events for many years.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Yeah. So you're familiar with some of the Haiti writing, with some of it's so beautiful in terms of travel. And his, I think it's in some of the writing is collected in the Big C, where he really, and what I love about the writing is his affinity and his respect, for rural people, and his ability to recognize a lot, as Zora Neale Hurston too, of the Southern American experience and the experience of the Haitian peasantry, which led to him and Mercer Cook translating, one of the great Haitian novels, Gouverneur de la Rosée, Masters of the Dew. And it's a really, I think it goes back to the 1940s. And they did that translation, which really cements, his relationship with Jacques Romain, who was the writer, but also with Haiti.
Okay. Stephanie said, what texts, authors, events have influenced your writing outside of the authors that you obviously love and already have mentioned?
Well, I think if I go back to the beginning, it's probably like the most influential type of stories for me were really oral stories, like oral storytelling. That's the first time listening to stories when I was younger, was how I realized that stories could be exciting, or stories could be frightening, or stories could be suspenseful. So that really was how I started writing. And when people ask who my best writing teachers were, I always say the oral storytellers of my childhood, because they knew they would watch you, and then they had a really powerful sense of pace. Like if you were falling asleep, then there was a song. If there were, there was a kind of back and forth participation in it. And actually, there's this example. It's brief, so I might just read it before we part. Of Max Jr. thinking of a story he was told. Is that okay if I just read that? If I read a little bit of that?
Sure.
As sort of an example of storytelling, but it's not a Haitian story, it's a Cornish folktale, which means that there's a Haitian proverb that says, parole gen pied, parole gen zèle, words have wings, words have feet. So this, if nothing else, proves that also. Now, as he walked fully clothed to the water, Max Jr. thought of his father's version of a Cornish folktale, one the old man had told him when he was little. In the story, a boy is lured into the woods by music. The deeper the boy walks into the woods, the denser the woods become, and the more beautiful the music. The boy follows this music until he gets so lost that he no longer knows where he is. He becomes so scared that he wants to return home, but he also wants to follow this music to see where it leads. After he walks so far that the woods become impassable, he begins to cry for help. And that's when a spirit emerges and makes a path for him. The path leads to the sea, where suddenly the music stops, and the boy is now so tired that he lies down and falls asleep. When he wakes up, the boy finds himself back home safely in his own bed, with his head full of music and mermaids and crystal palaces under the sea. The spirit in the woods saved this boy, his father said, because the spirit wanted the boy to remain innocent and good, and that innocence and goodness was as precious as the dreams that the spirit had placed in his head. And because of that innocence and goodness, the spirit would watch over him forever. Max Jr. now slipped into the water, feeling the cool waves rise and fall around him as the water ballooned his shirt. He thought of music. He also thought of flowers and birds. He thought of the birdhouses he and his father had built together after hours of schoolwork and judo practice when he was a boy. He thought of the orchids and roses in his father's garden, the dragonflies that buzzed around after a heavy rain, and the fireflies that bombarded them at night. He thought of yellow jasmine, his mother's favorite flowers. She would tie a bouquet to the front of her bicycle, then the two of them would ride next to each other through town. He remembered the talk they had had shortly before he left town. You are who you love, she had told him. You try to mend what you have torn, but remember that love is like kerosene. The more you have, the more you burn. So. Thank you. Do you have any more questions?
Stephanie has like one more.
All
right. Stephanie gets an A.
She said, does writing energize or exhaust you, and do you ever procrastinate?
Oh my gosh, yes. All of the above, Stephanie, as I'm sure you know, it sounds like. Sometimes it's invigorating. I think for me, what is most invigorating is when, I've been struggling with a character, I've been really trying to I've been wrestling with a story, and just like while I'm at dinner or I'm in the shower, or bam, you have a revelation, or you wake up in the morning and your mind has been mulling it over at night. So that's exhilarating. It's kind of like solving a math problem. From my recollection of solving math problems, oh, I got it. That moment of that's exhilarating. I found more recently, and maybe I was going too quickly in my life, from things to things. But lately, I feel like I literally have to recover from the things that I write. And often a lot of them, I've been trying to write more nonfiction and write more of the things that are happening around me, because for myself, I feel like I want a record of this time. I want to look back 5 years, 10 years from now, and this is what I was thinking, this is what was happening with my neighbors. So recently, I wrote something about I had a neighbor pass away, and I felt weary for 2 weeks from that. And I didn't quite understand it because it was a new feeling for me. But after a while, I was realized yeah, that was emotionally and, and physically exhausting to write that piece, because this was a neighbor who, when my mother died here in my house from, she had cancer, and she was in hospice with us at home. And my neighbor, took care of us really after that, brought us food, and then she died, but we couldn't even broach her door because of the environment that we're in now. So, and I realized that writing that piece was a way of grieving, not just her, but friends of my parents who I was watching Zoom funerals. And so no, it was, I felt really worn out after that, and it took a while to recover from that. And that was a new feeling for me in terms of recovering from writing something. Usually the writing was the process, was like the therapeutic thing. But this time, that, like, I feel in this moment, which, you know, with all that's going on. So the writing is more, it's slightly therapeutic, but it's also exhausting. And I do procrastinate, especially when I have deadlines. And sometimes it works out, as you know, as college students surely know. Sometimes procrastination, and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, the pressure, it worked. But most of the time, you end up regretting procrastinating.
I'm going to move the camera back to the center here. All right, well, I think that's everything, unless anybody else had any last minute like dire questions.
Let me just kind of summarize. I'm Chad, by the way.
Hello.
You know, corresponding by email.
Oh, hi, how are you? Thank you for all the...
And we're so pleased that we were able to accomplish this. It was Dr. Gates who suggested to me back in June or July that we try to contact you to set this up. But she said she's such a well-known author, I'm not sure we have much of a chance. And it took a while to find your email. I think I contacted your agent. And much to my surprise, you responded and agreed. And I think this was a delightful experience for the students as well as the faculty, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. And we have a lot of people watching by Zoom too, and I've noticed they haven't left. So let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I enjoyed it as well. And I'm glad to see everybody's wearing their masks. So be safe and please vote. Please vote. Bye-bye. Take care, everyone. Bye.